before Mr. Burns became the most powerful man in Springfield with an estimated net worth of $7.3 billion. Before he was ranked the 8th best villain of all time by Rolling Stone and number 2 on TV Guide's 60 nastiest villains of all time. Before Mr. Burns became Conan O'Brien's favorite character to write.
I really like the vest.
And inspire an off-Broadway play. Mr. Burns was based on someone Matt Groening knew back in his high school days, and like all villains, this guy's got a past. He wasn't always this fucked up. Something happened in his childhood, a pivotal moment that swung the pendulum in the direction of evil. Matt Groening's initial inspiration for the character of Mr. Burns was his high school teacher, Mr. Bailey, and I'm sure that dude is super flattered. In a 2014 interview, Mr. Bailey claims to be a generous man, so we may never know the truth about him.
Am I a capitalist? Do I believe in the free enterprise system? Yes. Check. Am I greedy? No, I think I'm a very generous person.
In case you were wondering, if Mr. Burns was a real person, here's what he'd look like. Just remember that face when you're trying to sleep at night. Now here's where the Mr. Burns creation story gets complicated because depending on who you're talking to, he was based on Dracula, a praying mantis, Fred Olsen, a crazy Norwegian billionaire, or basically a bunch of rich guys in the oil industry. Still, others believe the inspiration for Mr. Burns dates back to 16th century Italy. Commedia dell'arte was a form of mass theater featuring recurring stock characters. Pantalone, one of the principal characters, was a miserable old miser obsessed with money and maintaining the status quo. What did the guy look like? Well, basically Mr. Burns, a hunchback old man with a very long nose. And though the likeness may not be completely intentional, there's no denying Mr. Burns is a modern day Pantalone. Now with all these inspirations in mind, Matt Groening certainly had enough to create a strong and semi-disturbing backstory for Charles Montgomery Burns. Charles Montgomery Burns was born on September 15, 1890, but if you ask Mr. Burns himself, he claims he was born in 1881. The son of Colonel Clifford and Daphne Burns, Charles Montgomery was an amicable child so joyful his parents nicknamed him Happy. From a very young age, Mr. Burns grew attached to his teddy bear, Bobo.
Boy, there he is. Aren't I, Bobo?
His life took a fateful turn when he left his parents to live with his grandfather, Colonel Wainwright, heartless billionaire, former slaveholder, and generally terrible human being. The colonel ran something called an atom mill, where immigrant laborers would split atoms by hitting anvils with sledgehammers. Burns grew accustomed to a life of privilege and quickly took to injuring the immigrant laborers following his grandfather's footsteps. Burns' brothers and sisters, who accompanied him to live with their grandfather, all died under what was deemed suspicious circumstances, leaving Burns as the sole heir to the family fortune. Talk about lucky. Burns later attended Yale University where he studied business and science, played on a varsity football team, and was inducted to the Skull and Bones Secret Society. Burns graduated from Yale in 1914, which is around the time he attempted to murder his own mother. Talk about a psycho. The reason for the homicide? Daphne Burns had an extramarital affair with President William Taft. That's the fat one. And had Burns succeeded by pulling the plug, she would have not lived another 5 decades. In 1939 at a Yale reunion, Burns got freaky with the daughter of an old flame who would bear his only child, Larry Burns. Larry was given up for adoption, but would appear in season 8. Much to Burns' chagrin, he hits it off with Homer and can't stand Larry's boorish ways. The two agree they're better off without each other. In World War II, Burns served with the Flying Hellfish military unit alongside Abe Simpson. Burns' repeated attempts to murder Abe would eventually lead to his dishonorable discharge. Is it just me, or does this guy have a thing for murder? After the war, Burns was personally hired by President Harry S. Truman to transport a specially printed $1 trillion bill to Europe to help rebuild the continent post-war. As the United States' richest citizen, he was thought to be the most trustworthy, and clearly the person who made that call was very stupid. Burns kept the bill for many years until it was eventually stolen by Fidel Castro.
Now give it back.
Give what back?
And finally, in the 1970s, Mr. Burns bought the Springfield nuclear power plant. And the rest of the story? Well, you guys know the story because this is before they were fiction.